Pokemon Legends Arceus. It was a massive breath of fresh air for all Pokemon fans, considering how well most other Nintendo franchises have been popping off this generation. Pokemon has had frame dropping, Exit, an incredibly lazy and low effort remake, and yet another remake of a game that already had remakes with some weird Pokemon Go mechanics. The last one was actually pretty rad, and I don't know why on earth they put more visual effort into it than the Sinnoh remakes, but regardless, we needed this. We needed Legends Arceus. Now, it's not perfect, far from it. The visuals are a disaster. But besides the issues with it being rushed and a few changes to the core formula that I wasn't really on board with, Legends Arceus was pretty much exactly what we needed from Pokemon. It had a pretty good story, a lot of awesome fresh new mechanics, each of the different worlds were awesome, and they were finally revisiting an old region with old legendary Pokemon lore, instead of just piling on more and more new regions, which each one feeling progressively less special than the last. Honestly, at this point, new stuff is getting old. But better yet, they did it with one of the best regions in Pokemon history. Sinnoh was practically begging to be revisited, and frankly, it's a crime that they took this long to do it. After how awesome it was to see them revisit Sinnoh, it would also be a crime not to do it again. Pokemon Legends shouldn't be a one-off thing like Let's Go was. We need this to become a full-blown series that releases just as frequently as new generations. Although, new games have a tendency to take time to make, so whichever Pokemon Legends game we get next, it will be the only new one for a while, even if the Pokemon Company continues rushing them. It just so happens that there are a lot of regions to choose from, and they can only pick one. Which is why I've been burying the people who have been asking for Pokemon Legends Kyurem in my backyard. It's nothing personal, I just need to make sure that there's less competition for the Pokemon Legends game that I want. Pokemon Legends Rayquaza. I grew up on the Hoenn region. Pokemon Emerald is one of my favorite games of all time. And assuming Game Freak doesn't phone in it again, which it probably will, there is no game in the world that I want more than Pokemon Legends Rayquaza. Not even Metroid Prime 4. And I really want Metroid Prime 4. And that is why I will now be pitching my personal game idea for Pokemon Legends Rayquaza. I have put down some guidelines to make sure that Game Freak doesn't phone this in. They're probably going to phone it in anyway. Game Freak has become the master of phoning things in lately, and it's been going very well for them. But a man can dream. So here's my idea for Pokemon Legends Rayquaza. Here's the basic setup. The game takes place a few centuries before Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, around the same-ish time that Legends Arceus takes place. Recently, a meteoroid slammed into the shallows off the coast of Hoenn, leaving a large crater and ruins of the meteor. Strange energy has been spilling out of the impact site, and since then the weather in the Hoenn region has gone to an absolute extreme. Deadly heat waves have been plaguing Hoenn's landmass, and the sea has been under attack by constant hurricanes. Weather like this hasn't been reported since 50,000 years prior, when there was a massive war between land Pokemon and sea Pokemon, spearheaded by two godlike Pokemon. This war ended when a third godlike Pokemon descended from the heavens and trapped both of the other godlike Pokemon underground. Because of all the natural disasters now popping up, the people of Hoenn have taken refuge near the coast, a middle ground between the natural disasters, though some settlements have managed to sustain themselves out in the disaster zones. One of the settlements is Lilycove Village, where Pokemon Professor Stone takes residence. Professor Stone just so happens to be in possession of a certain mythical Pokemon known as Jirachi, and in an act of desperation, Stone has the Jirachi use a wish for Hoenn's salvation. This wish results in the player character suddenly appearing in a flash of light in the middle of town. The professor puts two and two together and realizes that you're here thanks to his wish, so he takes you in and provides you with the materials you need to accomplish the goal you were brought here for. You're given a starter Pokemon and sent to traverse this game's map and help save Hoenn. Let's look at the map. This is the map of the Hoenn region, and this is how it's going to be segmented for the sake of the game. Now, unlike Legends Arceus, you'll be able to travel between each of these areas on foot, and you'll have to the first time you visit them before you can fast travel, but there won't be much other than wild Pokemon and the occasional NPC outside of the highlighted zones. Because you can travel anywhere, even not the highlighted zones, this game's map is going to be much more faithful to the original Hoenn map than Legends Arceus was. Except, of course, it's going to be vastly scaled up. Also, the amount of highlighted areas in this game is far greater than the amount in Legends Arceus. Almost every key area is covered. Each zone in this map is color-coded. The orange zone is the home base hub area. The pink zones are the land areas that are being plagued by heat waves. The purple zones are the ocean areas that are being assaulted by hurricanes. The red zones are the territories of certain super ancient Pokemon. And the black zone is the meteoroid impact site where all the primal energy is pouring out into the atmosphere. The dots in each area show where that area's boss is located. When going through each area, only both A areas will be safe to travel through. After you clear the A area for land, you can go to the B area, and then the C area. Same for the ocean areas. A, then B, then C. The red zones will be unlocked after clearing every area on both the land and sea. You'll be able to travel through all the areas except for the red ones before you unlock them, but the weather will be too intense for you to do anything substantial until you clear the previous area. When it comes to the red areas, the weather will remain intense even after it's unlocked, but it will ease up just enough so that you can traverse those areas safely. While you unlock each area on land and sea by completing their predecessor, you're encouraged to bounce between clearing land zones and sea zones. Each area, aside from the red and the black ones, will have at least one settlement inside of it. And in the case of each of the B areas, that settlement will be a Draconid village. Land Area B has a Draconid settlement inside Meteor Falls, and Sea Area B has a Draconid settlement built on a string of islands around where Sky Pillar will eventually be. The mechanics of this game are essentially a blend between the mechanics in Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, and the mechanics in Legends Arceus. The battle system will take many elements from Legends Arceus, but the way turns are handled will go back to being how it was in normal Pokemon games. This is because the system in Legends Arceus makes it so that you can't use items, switch, or use priority moves if an enemy outspeeds you, which is something I just generally hate. Also, I think the old system would work better with the strong and agile style mechanic, since this way you can use agile style to outspeed instead of just potentially getting 2 turns in a row down the line. And it makes the speed drawbacks of strong style far more prominent. So, we're using the old turn system, but we are keeping the strong and agile style mechanic, because of course we are, that's a pretty cool mechanic. Now, in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, it specified that Rayquaza was the first ever Mega Evolution. This means that in this game we'll be needing to bring Mega Evolution back, although only for one Pokemon, unfortunately. Frankly, they never should have gotten rid of that mechanic in favor of making a new knockoff version of that mechanic in every game since. Then I suppose it's time we talk about the bosses. Legends Arceus had these awesome sequences where you went to battle against a Pokemon that's been thrown into a frenzy after being hit with energy from a dimensional rift. You weren't fighting the thing with your Pokemon, you were fighting it yourself, and it was awesome. This game's equivalent to that is the Primal Pokemon. Pokemon that went too close to the Meteor Impact site and absorbed some of its power. You'll fight them using special orbs built out of a strange type of material that was found inside of Mount Higher. After you throw the orb at a Primal Pokemon, the orb absorbs a significant amount of primal energy from it. However, unlike the Balms in Legends Arceus, you only get one of these per fight. So after you throw the orb at a Primal Pokemon, you have to run over and grab it again. This will change the fights from being epic dynamic battles like in Legends Arceus to something that's still very dynamic, but also a lot more careful and opportunity-based, since you'll have to make sure that every throw counts while also having to retrieve the orb while evading attacks from the Primal Pokemon. Many of the zones throughout Hoenn have heat waves if they're on land, or hurricanes if they're in the sea, and that weather subsides after you take down the Primal from the previous zone. However, there will also be occasional pockets of extremely bad weather, even cleared areas, and these pockets will disappear and reappear randomly throughout areas. Just like with the weather covering full zones, the land areas will have heat wave pockets, and the ocean areas will have typhoon pockets. In these weather pockets, you'll find rare Pokemon at high levels, with their typing matching the type of weather. These pockets of extreme weather will essentially be this game's equivalent of the space-time distortions from Legends Arceus, though they'll also be a bit bigger than them. Sailing, or I suppose in this game's case, surfing. A large percentage of the Hoenn region is ocean, and about half of the game's areas is ocean-based. Because of this, riding on the back of a water Pokemon is made much different in this game. The process of riding on a Pokemon's back won't be much different than in Legends Arceus, but there will be more islands and more stuff for you to do in the water. In Legends Arceus, you rode on the back of these holy Pokemon that you summon with the Celestica Flute. This game doesn't have holy Pokemon, so instead you'll be able to ride on the back of the Primal Pokemon after you defeat them. There's one more thing I need to cover, and that's the Pokedex. In Legends Arceus, it was a huge thing that you had to not only complete the Pokedex, but do all these tasks with every Pokemon in order to reach the true ending. This time, though, we're not doing that. The Pokedex is here, of course, but it's about as prevalent as it is in any other normal Pokemon game. Your goal here is simply to help solve the extreme natural disasters in Hoenn, and you unlock new areas by beating the Primal Pokemon in the previous area. That's not to say that there won't be a final fun thing if you do succeed in completing the Pokedex, but it's not nearly as big of a deal as it is in Arceus, because that was kind of a tall order. With that, I think I've covered everything important. So now I think it's finally time for us to cover the campaign. The game starts with all the setup stuff I told you earlier. After you land in the middle of Lily Cove, Professor Stone, aka Steven's ancestor, provides you with the choice of either Totodile, Chimchar, or Snivy as your starter. After picking your starter, you'll join up with the Natural Disaster Brigade, led by Commander Birch, Professor Birch's ancestor. This is also where you'll meet your rival, Molly, Wally's ancestor. After this, you're given the option to set out to either Fort Tree Jungle or Moss Deep Archipelago, the only two full areas that aren't being affected by the weather. Fort Tree Jungle has a small village settlement west of the jungle. In this village, people have had problems involving hordes of invisible Pokemon coming in at night and stealing food before returning to the jungle. Thankfully, your rival Molly is a skilled tracker, and she gives you enough information to find the invisible Pokemon's camp. There, you'll find a nest of Kecleon, and manage to retrieve some of the food from them. However, you notice that they weren't the ones eating the food, instead giving it to a shadowy Pokemon who's difficult to see. You return the food to the village while Molly tracks down the lair of the shadow Pokemon. She returns shortly, and on arrival, you discover that it's a primal Pokemon. If you've already encountered a primal, you simply equip an orb and engage in a boss fight against the Absol. If this is your first, you'll instead return to Lily Cove, where you'll find Professor Stone overseeing the excavation of Mount Pyre's minerals. After you tell him about the primal Pokemon, he'll be surprised by this, and then he'll spend time in his lab fashioning the Pyre minerals into the Primal Absorption Orb, which he'll then hand off to you, and then you can return to the Primal Absol's den and engage it in a boss fight. After beating it, you get to use it as a ride Pokemon, and the heat wave covering Delta Heights clears up. Professor Stone will also call you back to his laboratory, where he'll supply you with more Primal Absorption Orbs. You're given a ride through Moss Deep Archipelago by some fellow members of the Natural Disaster Brigade, and they drop you off at the settlement on the main island. You can traverse your way to a lot of the other smaller islands by foot thanks to a lot of the water being mysteriously frozen. The people of Moss Deep say this is because of an increase in aggressive ice Pokemon activity around Shoal Cave, causing this normally tropical climate to start freezing up. After investigating the freezing a little bit, you're forced to rush back to town after a small army of Glalie, Frostlass, and Celios start attacking the settlement. Eventually you can run them off, and everyone decides that you'll have to find a way to blow open the small opening in Shoal Cave so that you can fit inside. There's a crazy science guy who has a laboratory at the peak of the main island, and you're able to negotiate with him to let you have some of his boom power in exchange for you catching him a Staryu. After doing this catch, he blasts open to the entrance to Shoal Cave. You make your way through the cave, fighting hostile ice Pokemon, until eventually finding a Primal Walrein. If you haven't fought a Primal yet, you have to go back to Lily Cove and do the whole orb mission thing with the professor so you can get an orb and come back and do the boss fight. If you already have an orb, you can just do the boss fight. After beating Primal Walrein, you can ride on its back to get around the ocean without being ferried or walking on ice, and the hurricane over the Delta Isles clears up. Welcome to Delta Heights, where you may first encounter the indigenous people of Hoenn, also known as the Draconids. The Draconids have managed their survival in the harsh temperature conditions thanks to the fact that their village is underground, within the caverns inside Meteor Falls, where they've been mining Megastones. Although at this point in time, they don't know what Megastones are yet and just refer to them as Rainbow Stones. All of them are powerful dragon trainers, and they're led by a Draconid named Maria, who just so happens to be Maxie's ancestor and also happens to have a Latias. Obviously, they won't be 100% on board with you waltzing into their cavern network at first, but after you beat a few of their trainers and then face off against Maria, they'll let you pass through and tell you about a primal Flygon who used to belong to Maria, before going rogue and absorbing power from the impact site. It's currently made a nest down near Rusturf Tunnel. You'll have to deal with some Whismur to get to it, but once you do, you're able to engage in a boss fight. Once the fight is over and you've absorbed all the Flygon's primal energy, you return it to Maria, but she tells you that you're welcome to summon it any time as a ride Pokemon for low-altitude flying. Defeating Primal Flygon also clears up the heat wave in the Little Root Forest. Next up, Delta Isles. This area, like Delta Heights, is home to a village of Draconids. This village is located on the upper islands of this area, and in the center of the village is a very large temple that's several stories tall. Hint hint, this temple will eventually become Sky Pillar. This church is where you'll find the leader of this Draconid village, Arthur, who happens to be Archie's ancestor, and who also happens to own a Latios. Arthur tells the player that this temple was built to worship the Pokemon god from the sky who ended the war between land and sea Pokemon 50,000 years ago. This conversation is interrupted when a large Gyarados starts stirring up trouble near the edge of the island. After dealing with the Gyarados, you're informed that there was a Kingdra that used to patrol the surrounding areas of Delta Isles to prevent any trouble like this, but that it went missing shortly before the hurricanes began. During this conversation, a member of the Natural Disaster Brigade shows up and said it was just attacked by a Kingdra down south. You go track down the Kingdra, and yep, it's gone primal. You have to follow it around a bit, but eventually you find its lair and you engage it in a boss battle. Once you beat it, you can now use it as a ride Pokemon to climb waterfalls, and beat abnormally strong currents. And the hurricanes by Dewford Cove clear up. Little Root Forest is the last of the baseland areas. It used to be a nice humble little wood, but a very large portion of it burned down thanks to the heat wave. The only settlement around is located by the beach, but it's pretty big considering it's on the coastline, so it's in sort of the neutral zone. The people are thankful for your arrival since they haven't seen any outsiders in a long time. The people say that it was a large, fat, and angry Pokemon who started the forest fire, and that after it started, it ended up burning down half the forest thanks to the heat wave. You're sent searching around the burnt parts of the woods and the parts that are still standing, so that you can hopefully find the Pokemon who did this. You're able to figure out pretty quickly that this was the work of yet another Primal, and that it probably burned down the forest so that the wild Pokemon would be forced to take refuge under them. After getting some clues and following some trails to hopefully find the Pokemon that did this, you eventually come across the lair of a Primal Slacking, and the innocent forest Pokemon that it's been lording over. After taking the Slacking's primal energy, you can use it as a ride Pokemon to climb ledges. Dewford Cove is the final base area. The waters surrounding Dewford Cove are being patrolled by pirates. I mean, come on. With how much ocean is in this game, what kind of buzzkill would I have to be to not include pirates in this game? Even in the original Hoenn games, I would definitely argue that Team Aqua were pirates. I mean, they stole a submarine. Anyways, once you get to Dewford Island, you find this area's settlement, which is populated by an entire one person. There is a single guy living on the island, a fisherman. He says that the fish Pokemon in the water have been acting very strange recently, and that the Pokemon in Dewford Cave have been acting even stranger. You figure that there's probably another primal Pokemon behind this, so you enter Dewford Cave to hopefully find it somewhere in there. Dewford Cave here is a very large cave. Much bigger than it ever was in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, and even bigger than it was in the original Gen 3 games. At the bottom level of the cave, you find a very large underwater lake where a primal Milotic has been holed up. After you take the Milotic's power, you can use it as a ride Pokemon to dive underwater. After taking down the primals from both Little Root Forest and Dewford Cove, the heat wave plaguing the Chimney Mountains and the hurricane that's been assaulting the Evergrande Sea both calm down slightly. The weather in these places is still really bad, but now it's just okay enough so you can travel through these areas safely without immediately dying of a heat stroke or getting drowned by giant waves. Something else that happens once you take down all the primals is that you're asked to come back to Lilycove to meet with Professor Stone, Commander Birch, and the leaders of the Draconids. It turns out the Latios belonging to Maria and the Latios belonging to Arthur both went missing. Commander Birch says that he's received a few reports from members of the Natural Disaster Brigade that there's been sightings of Latios in the Chimney Mountains, and that there's been sightings of Latios out in the Evergrande Sea. It doesn't take long for everyone to work out that they've probably traveled to the impact site and went primal. Professor Stone flips through his research notes a bit, and he finds a few signs that point to the possibility that the Chimney Mountains and the Evergrande Sea may be where the two godlike Pokemon from the war 50,000 years ago were locked underground. So it looks like you've got your final two destinations. You need to stop Primal Latios and Primal Latios from waking up Groudon and Kyogre. You can go to either one of these locations first. For the sake of this video, let's start at the Chimney Mountains, home of rocky hillscapes and barren deserts, all made even more deadly by the treacherous heat wave beating down upon the surface. After using Slacking to climb to the top of the volcano, you find Latios firing a large energy beam into the side of the mountain. The game has you try and throw an orb at it in order to take some of its primal energy, but the orb ends up disintegrating once you get close to Latios, who barely even notices you're there. Apparently, these orbs aren't made to withstand primal energy coming from a Pokemon whose power levels are legendary. You're able to sneak your way into the hole that the Latios is making with the energy beam, while making sure to carefully stay away from the beam itself. And you can slip your way into a side cavern from the massive hole. There you'll find yourself in a massive cave network underneath Mount Chimney, and at the end of this cave network is a huge cavern with a large lava lake where Groudon has been locked for the past 50,000 years. Time for a big fat Pokemon battle against Groudon. It's a pretty difficult fight since, Groudon. You're able to defeat it though, and for a second it seems like you've won, as the heat wave finally lets up. Then the energy beam finally manages to breach its way through the side of the cavern, and Latios makes its way in. You watch, unable to do anything, as Latios transfers its primal energy to Groudon. Suddenly, the entire land side of Hoenn is hit with a massive heat wave, as Primal Groudon emerges and breaks free from its confinement. Primal Groudon starts moving towards the impact site, and there's nothing you can do except go back to Lily Cove. Professor Stone theorizes that all of the land primals were under Groudon's control, and that they may have been lending Groudon some of their power, which was the cause of all the heat waves. But Latios was the first one strong enough to break open Mount Chimney and transfer its power directly to Groudon. Professor Stone also theorized that Kyogre may have been doing the same thing with all the sea primals, and that Latios is probably trying to break Kyogre free as they speak, and needs to be stopped. This whole conversation happens vice versa if you decide to visit Kyogre before Groudon. Now it's time for Evergrande Sea, where Kyogre lies in wait. This place is very difficult to surf across because of the typhoon, but you're able to manage. Eventually, you find Latios firing a laser into the water. You try using an orb to capture its energy, but you fail, and when you use Milotic to dive underwater, you end up finding a massive underwater cave network that the Latios is digging into using its energy beam. After you explore the Seafloor Cavern for long enough, you eventually find a huge cavern containing a large underground lake, where Kyogre has been locked for the past 50,000 years. You battle against Kyogre, win, the hurricane clears up, and then Latios' energy beam manages to make a hole big enough for it to enter in and transfer its primal power over to Kyogre. This causes the hurricane to come back even stronger, this time swooping over the entire seascape of Hoenn. Primal Kyogre is now free from its confinement and starts heading towards the impact site. With both super ancient Pokemon freed, you're called in to meet the rest of the Natural Disaster Brigade by the impact site. There, you bear witness to both Primal Groudon and Primal Kyogre reaching their destination, and they start battling. This causes the bad weather around Hoenn to spike up even worse, with the heat waves mixing with the hurricanes to create even more chaos. Boiling water hurricanes. That's very bad. It's only a matter of time until these heat storms destroy Hoenn and start sweeping over the rest of the world. The entire Natural Disaster Brigade is requested to rendezvous at Mount Pyre. There, you meet up with Professor Stone along with a collective of Draconids including Maria and Arthur, who seem to have found and regained control of Latios and Latios. There's quite a lot of bickering between the Disaster Brigade and the Draconids, but eventually they come to an agreement that the only one who can stop this madness between Groudon and Kyogre is the godlike Pokemon from the sky that ended the war between land and sea 50,000 years prior. Maria provides Arthur with a massive rainbow stone that her people had mined out of Meteor Falls, and Arthur preys upon the power of this stone using his decades of knowledge as a priest to the Sky Pokemon, just like Zinnia would do atop Sky Pillar 3 centuries later, in an attempt to summon the super ancient dragon itself. After a few seconds of just sitting there, your rival Molly eventually realizes that one of you will need to capture it. Since you're the one who was summoned here by Jirachi to save Hoenn, everyone decides it should be you. So, you have to battle the great legendary Sky Pokemon in order to prove your worth, and once you're done, everyone discovers the Sky Pokemon's true name. Rayquaza. In addition to having captured Rayquaza, you've now also unlocked it as the final ride Pokemon. You can now just straight up fly on its back to wherever you want, like a more advanced version of soaring from Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Even with Rayquaza, however, everyone realizes that you'll still need to find a way to contain Groudon and Kyogre's primal energy. The orbs didn't work on Latios and Latios, so they certainly won't work on the significantly more powerful Groudon and Kyogre. Then, Molly gets the idea to use the powers belonging to Latios and Latios to try and enhance the orbs, so that their energy capacity could hopefully be expanded enough to be able to contain Groudon and Kyogre's primal energy. Professor Stone gets the two biggest orbs he can find, and then they try out Molly's idea. Latios enhances one, turning it into the red orb, while Latios enhances the other, turning it into the blue orb. With that, you hop on Rayquaza's back and make way towards the Meteoroid impact site, where hopefully you can stop the battle between Primal Groudon and Primal Kyogre before it's too late. However, once you arrive at the impact site, you'll notice that the surging primal energy combined with the raging heat storms makes it impossible for you to get close enough to Primal Groudon and Kyogre for you to use the orbs to take their power. The gang back at Mount Pyre sees this and realizes that if you can't get close enough, then all hope may be lost. In an act of panic and desperation, Molly asks Professor Stone for his Jirachi. Professor Stone says that even Jirachi isn't powerful enough to wish away all that primal energy, because if he was, then they would have done that ages ago. But Molly knows this as well. So instead, she wishes for more power to be gifted to Rayquaza, so so that it hopefully may be able to find the strength to be able to push through the primal energy and into the eye of the storm. Upon making this wish, Maria's rainbow stone starts glowing, and a massive beam of power shoots out of it and into Rayquaza, which causes it to Mega Evolve. With Rayquaza's Mega Evolution, you're able to push through the Heat Storms and the Primal Energy, and you find yourself looking at Primal Groudon and Primal Kyogre, who stop fighting and turn to face you with top Mega Rayquaza as they realize that you're the greater threat to the two. Cue the final battle. You have two orbs, the red orb for Groudon and the blue orb for Kyogre. You have to ride around on Mega Rayquaza's back and throw them at each of the legendary Pokemon while they're both attacking you with ridiculously powerful attacks, and having to pick up the orbs flying around in the massive wind currents after you throw them, and making sure not to mix up the two. It would be one heck of a final battle against two Primal Legendaries. After you take both of their Primal Energy, you're dropped off on the shore as Rayquaza settle things by sending Groudon and Kyogre back to their underground confinements, and all the extreme weather around Hoenn clears up. You have now completed your purpose from being summoned here by Jirachi. Hoenn has been saved. Roll credits!
And that's the video. Of course, there does need to be a post-game, since all Pokemon games have post-games. But like with the Kirby video, I will be relegating that to a part 2. And I would just like to say, I am so sorry this video took so long to make. I haven't posted since, like, the first day of November, and it's almost Christmas, so... I wish I could have a good excuse, like, this video took just that long to make, but in all honesty, this video wasn't nearly as complicated to make as the Kirby pitch, or the Metroid pitch, or the Zelda Part 2 pitch. Now, in truth, I just got really distracted over these past couple months. There's a bit of time when I was traveling, but most of it was just me getting addicted to a new TV show. With all that aside, I do hope to try and get at least one more video to you guys before the year ends, and please do stay tuned for what I have more, because now that this is out, I plan on getting my act together. And thank you guys for watching this, really. Thank you.